February 1258. A man walks through his own treasury. Guards flank him on both sides, not his guards. He studies piles of gold he spent half a century protecting. Gold that bought silks. Gold that funded scholars. Gold that filled vaults while his soldiers went without armor. The men beside him watch his face closely, waiting to see if understanding finally arrives. He says nothing. Behind him, his city is burning. Ahead of him waits something worse than fire. This is Caliph al-Mustasim of Baghdad, commander of the faithful, ruler of the Abbasid Caliphate, spiritual successor to the Prophet Muhammad himself. In 3 hours, he will be dead. Not by sword, not by arrow, not by any method history usually remembers. Because the men who destroyed his city followed rules most of the world had never encountered. And what they did to his family wasn't simply execution. It was design. A structure built in blood, meant to be read by every ruler from Damascus to Delhi. They never needed to repeat it. Once was enough. For 5 centuries, Baghdad wasn't just a capital. It was the axis of civilization itself. Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy here. Indian mathematics merged with Islamic law. Knowledge from across the known world flowed into libraries that cataloged medicine, engineering, mechanics, and mathematics. The House of Wisdom alone held texts that would take 3 lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra here. Al-Razi wrote medical works Europe wouldn't translate for another 400 years. Scholars traveled from Spain to Samarkand just to study in Baghdad's academies. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Underground canals carried fresh water across neighborhoods. Markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Hospitals treated patients regardless of faith or wealth. This wasn't a fading empire clinging to memory. This was a civilization at full operational strength. And ruling over it all was the Caliph. Not merely a king, not merely a political leader. The Caliph was the successor to Muhammad. Spiritual authority over millions. Legitimacy traced through 37 generations. Al-Mustasim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a government rotting from within. The Abbasid Caliphate still spoke with religious authority, but its armies were largely mercenaries. Governors ruled like independent warlords. The treasury was full, yet rarely opened for defense. Baghdad had survived weakness before. It had endured civil wars, rival caliphs, internal decay. Empires rose and collapsed around it, while scholars kept writing and markets kept trading. So when distant reports arrived of horsemen in the east, horsemen who had erased the Khwarezmian Empire, depopulated Persian cities, and ignored rivers, mountains, and borders, Baghdad took note and did nothing. The Mongols were not an army. They were a system. Refined over 50 years of constant warfare across frozen steppe, desert, and mountain, they operated with mechanical precision. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind something unprecedented. Not just conquered land, but a doctrine. Warfare reduced to a repeatable process. One of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was tasked with carrying that process west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai gave Hulagu a clear objective: secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not conquest, submission. The Mongol Empire wasn't built on occupation. It was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early survived. Their rulers stayed in power. Their people lived. They paid tribute and acknowledged Mongol supremacy. Cities that resisted stopped existing. Every target received the same sequence. Mongol envoys arrived first. carrying written terms: submit immediately, send tribute, provide hostages, usually the ruler's sons, accept Mongol authority. Compliance meant survival. Walls remained standing, markets stayed open, life continued. Refusal triggered nothing at first. No threats, no ultimatums, just silence. Weeks passed, sometimes months. Daily life resumed. Defenders convinced themselves the Mongols had moved on. Then the horizon filled with horsemen. Not chaotic swarms, formations. Cavalry units moving in coordinated patterns. Siege engines arriving on wagons. The army didn't attack. It surrounded. Every gate, every road, every escape route. Then construction began. In full view of the defenders, Mongol engineers assembled siege machines. Trebuchets capable of hurling 300-pound stones. Chinese and Persian specialists working alongside Mongol soldiers. The defenders watched devices built specifically to dismantle their walls. A second embassy arrived. The terms were repeated word for word. This was the final chance. Most cities surrendered here. If refusal continued, the siege followed. Not chaos, but procedure. Walls breached. Infantry entered in units. Cavalry secured routes. The city fell section by section. Once inside, the population was sorted. Artisans spared, scholars spared, engineers spared. Everyone else gathered outside the walls. What followed wasn't random violence. It was systematic elimination. Survivors were resettled across Mongol territories. The city itself was often burned, not out of anger, but as evidence. The Mongols didn't conquer land, they conquered behavior. By 1257, Hulagu had applied this system across Persia. Nishapur refused, erased. Merv refused, depopulated. Herat refused, reduced to ruins. Now he turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, Hulagu sent 3 envoys to Baghdad. They carried a single letter. You know what happened to the cities of Persia. You know the cost of refusal. Present yourself. Submit. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and your city will be spared. The letter arrived on a Thursday. By Friday, the debate had begun. Al-Mustasim convened his advisors. The room split immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, urged immediate submission. He laid out the facts. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded 400,000 soldiers. Fortified cities, mountain strongholds, all gone. These are not raiders, he warned. This is a system refined by 50 years of warfare. We cannot fight them. We can only survive them. He recommended opening the gates before the siege began. Baghdad's military commander disagreed. The Mongols were steppe cavalry, he argued. They excelled in open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. The Mongols had no experience sustaining sieges so far from their supply base. A third faction appealed to theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate, the heart of Islamic civilization. God would not allow pagans to destroy the Prophet's legacy. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a crisis of this magnitude. Contemporary sources describe him as devoted to luxury and scholarship, uncomfortable with military matters, confident in the authority of his title. He looked at Hulagu's letter and made his decision. "We are the Caliphate," he said. "We do not submit to threats from horsemen." The envoys were dismissed. No tribute, no preparations. Ibn al-Alqami tried once more. "If we refuse, they will come." "Then let them come," the Caliph replied. The envoys left Baghdad on September 24th, 1257, carrying silence. What followed was more revealing than the refusal itself. The Caliph didn't mobilize the army. He didn't reinforce the walls. He didn't open the treasury. Life continued as if the threat might dissolve through neglect. 300 miles east, Hulagu's army began to move. On November 11th, Mongol advance forces appeared 30 miles from Baghdad. Scouts reported roughly 5,000 cavalry, no siege engines visible. Baghdad's commander saw opportunity. If this force was isolated, it could be destroyed in open terrain. A decisive victory would discourage further advance. The Caliph agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east, 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry, the largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried 3 days of supplies. The plan was simple: intercept, engage, destroy, return victorious. On November 15th, the armies met northeast of Baghdad. Baghdad deployed traditionally, cavalry on the wings, infantry in the center. Across the field stood fewer Mongols than expected, maybe 4,000. Baghdad's cavalry charged. The Mongols retreated, not in panic, but in formation. 1 mile, 2 miles. Then the trap closed. Hidden Mongol cavalry surged from gullies north and south. Baghdad's horsemen found themselves surrounded, not by 4,000, but 15,000. What followed wasn't a battle. It was dismantling. Mongol cavalry archers moved at full gallop, firing as they rode. Their composite bows punched through armor at 200 yards. Baghdad's cavalry tried to regroup, but the formation was already gone. Orders vanished into noise and dust. Horses collided. Men fell. From the center, Baghdad's infantry watched the wings disappear into the Mongol mass. Panic spread. The infantry began retreating toward the city. The Mongols didn't chase them. Instead, they tightened the ring around the trapped cavalry and finished the work with methodical precision. By nightfall, it was over. Of the 20,000 men who marched out, fewer than 3,000 made it back. The Caliph's personal guard was annihilated. The mercenary cavalry was gone. Baghdad's field army didn't retreat or scatter. It ceased to exist. When survivors staggered into the city with their reports, the situation fundamentally changed. This hadn't been a skirmish. It had been a lure, a deliberate demonstration. By December, the main Mongol force appeared on the horizon. Baghdad's walls were now the only defense left. On January 11th, 1258, the Mongol army completed its encirclement. Hulagu commanded an estimated 150,000 soldiers. The Mongols didn't simply surround Baghdad. They built systems around it. Fortified camps rose at every gate. Guard rotations were scheduled. Supply lines stretched back into Persia. Escape became impossible. Then the construction began. In full view of the walls, engineers assembled siege engines with mathematical